Hospitality Meets is brought to you by RotaCloud, the people management platform for hospitality teams. With its intuitive drag-and-drop rota planner and built-in budgeting tools, RotaCloud users spend an average of 66% less time on staffing-related admin, leaving them with more time to spend with their customers, train staff, or simply take a well-earned break. Head over to rotacloud.com/Phil to explore RotaCloud's full range of tools and features and sign up for your 30-day free trial. Welcome to Hospitality Meets with me, Phil Street, where each week we take a light-hearted look into the stories and individuals that make up the wonderful world of hospitality. Today's guest is David Taylor, CEO of Lower Group and total industry titan. Coming up on today's show, David and Phil take their relationship up a notch.
The fact that we're sitting in a bedroom in Shoreditch, people might start to ask questions.
With the Do Not Disturb sign on.
With the Do Not Disturb sign on.
Our heroes run into a problem. Quickly find a solution. And David tells us the blueprint for all good ideas.
It was ridiculous, but brilliant.
All that and so much more as David talks us through his absolutely epic story so far. David's story is brimmed with fantastic anecdotes and learning as we get a wonderful insight into some of the thinking that has led to him becoming one of the preeminent hoteliers of our time. Not only that, he tells his story with real class and humour throughout, and I'll be forever grateful that he was so gracious with his time. This chat serves as a fitting finale to Season 4, but you won't have to wait long for Season 5 as we get struck straight into that next week. In the meantime, please don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. Enjoy. And a huge Hospitality Meets welcome to industry legend, David Taylor.
Phil, I'm not worthy of that.
You totally are. You totally are. We'll get into that as we go through your story, I'm sure, but... Yeah, how are you?
I'm great. You know, I think the fact that we're sitting in a bedroom in Shoreditch, people might start to ask questions.
With the Do Not Disturb sign on.
With the Do Not Disturb sign on. But equally, good air conditioning when the weather's finally arrived, as the kids have gone back to school.
Yeah, absolutely. I sweated for 10 minutes on my way here today, and to sit in an air-conditioned room right now and having a chat to you is a sanctuary beyond words.
We're in a good place, for sure.
Absolutely. And I have to just talk before we get into it about the hospitality that greeted me here in the form of biscuits with Hospitality Meets on. Lovely touch.
The team are always looking for ways of delivering personalisation, and you know, clearly that gets harder and harder and harder. So I think there's any nugget or something, and I'm sure they were very well briefed by my assistant Pooja.
Yeah, indeed, yes. She's a legend as well. But in any case, let's just get straight to it. We'll obviously come on to what you've got your head in at the moment in the fullness of the discussion. But just tell the world who you are and what you do.
So David Taylor, Chief Executive Officer for Lower Group, which is the hotel business of Global Holdings. And I've been doing this since last week in April in 2020.
Great time
It's
to
not
join.
necessarily when you'd want to be starting a new job.
No, well, I suppose contrary to that, maybe the best time to start a new job, as long as there was a long-term vision.
Yeah, certainly a steep learning curve, but I think it also a great time to join what is an amazing business anyway, of which we're now building on that. Where equally, you know, funnily enough, as the Americans say, there was no playbook for COVID, and therefore no playbook for what do you do next. Yeah. And I guess that's sort of where sort of my journey with law began then.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great stuff. Well, I mean, we'll get into Lower and what you do in more detail later, but take us all the way back to the beginning. How did you get into hospitality in the first place?
Well, I think my mother made this sort of comment saying that either I'm going to do really well or end up in prison, and I think I went to what was I went to boarding school from sort of 11 through 18. And you know, it wasn't a sort of fancy boarding school. It was a really great boarding school with an amazing headmaster. And I think you know, whereas a lot of these places, you know, you're put on a production line and they want you all to do the same thing.
Right.
It really did recognise people and what they did differently. Most people who weren't necessarily the most academic or the ones that were looking to become a doctor or a lawyer, they were really good on the sports field. I neither wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I wasn't very good at rugby or football.
Right. So it is prison for you then.
It could have been, and I think that I think that's sort of probably like a lot of peers. You know, if there's two things really happen, I guess. I experienced hotels as a kid, and and these were, we're talking, places in, Devon and Cornwall, possibly Spain, probably when, my parents had a good year. So this isn't
Right.
like, far-flung glamorous places because they were paying for my education. But I just became sort of fascinated with hotels and how they worked and people's interaction. And, some of it was like the people side and some of it was just the mechanics of, this place has lots of guests and every day, like Groundhog Day, the whole thing starts again. And I became fascinated by it. And I'm sure, like a lot of people, it was one of those things where, when my parents had, people over for dinner parties or drinks, I just naturally just wanted to be the person sort of helping and, whether that be serving drinks, helping with the cooking. So I guess I always sort of felt that perhaps there was something that would suit me in this business. And but I guess the story where it all starts to play out was, I was a weekly boarder. I was 15 years old, and I grew up west of Birmingham. And I happened to be, I was meeting somebody, but I was walking through Birmingham, and I remember looking up at this, this amazing sort of glass building, and it was the fairly newly opened Hyatt Hotel. And as someone very proud of my Midlands heritage, but recognising that you don't generally see this type of building in Birmingham, I was like, wow, this looks like the best hotel in the world.
Yeah.
And so literally, I found myself walking into the hotel, which is sort of completely ridiculous when I think about it now, because it's a Saturday afternoon, and sort of asking if anyone from at the time personnel was there. And it just happened that there was this amazing lady called Sophia Chan, who happened to be on duty, who also happened to be the director of HR.
Right.
And I sort of pitched to her that, I really loved hotels and could I do some work experience? So I think she sort of looked me up and down and went, so what, you're going to do work experience just at weekends when you're not at school? And I said, yeah, I'd quite like to do that. And she went, yeah, let's make it work.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, do you know, there's a great lesson there in being bold, like especially because you've got an intrigue level at this point, I suppose, more than a knowledge level of actually what goes on, but bold enough to go in and go, can I get involved?
Yeah, I think it was, I think it was one of those things where I suppose I looked at it and thought, this is clearly the best hotel in Birmingham, which of course at the time was quite a low bar.
Right.
And this was, an international company. And she basically assigned me to the Bell team, which again is probably like, a very American sounding thing, but in Birmingham it's like the Bell team, what would ring bells? But, but obviously these were the bellboys on the forecourt outside. And, they were mostly cousins who'd originated in Birmingham, ended up working in sort of big top hotels in London and come back. So they basically took me under, took me under their wing, and in my limited sort of Saturdays and Sundays for quite a long time, this sort of, that began my hospitality career.
Right.
So that's where it all began, Phil.
Right. Goodness. Yeah. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, I did have a look on your LinkedIn profile, as I tend to do for information. You don't get everything on there, but I did see that property on the profile, but I had no clues to the context of how someone ends up there doing that. And actually, for me, I love that boldness that you had at that time, and I think there's that kind of fortune favours the brave approach to your career can really, especially in the beginning, can really pay dividends.
Yeah, I think so, and it's I suppose what's really interesting about Sophia was that she'd come out of Asia, and with groups like Hyatt, it's almost a case of when you get your first big leadership role, they're sort of they're probably going to send you somewhere far flung like Birmingham,
right?
And so you had somebody that had a amazing hospitality degree from University of Surrey, in fact, but she'd come over from sort of Hong Kong, and I guess I was going into the sixth form, and I guess so. Everyone talks about signposting from a careers perspective, and the school were trying to signpost everyone into again those more classical career routes with the appropriate university. And and interestingly, I was sort of thinking, I'm not sure actually what potential I'm going to get by necessarily just following a generic course when I really believe I want to be in the hospitality business. Mm. And secondly, I was sort of questioning whether or not actually at that moment in time getting a degree would be the right thing to do.
Yep.
So what ended up happening was that I managed to get myself a place at Oxford Poly, as it used to be called before it became posh and became Oxford Brookes. But then I decided actually I'm going to take the equivalent of a gap year, and I'm going to go and in essence start at the Hyatt on full time. And Sophia had sort of built in essence like a training plan for me, and she really believed that I would get more from a more practical, orientation to initially front office. I'd done some other work in the meantime at other hotels and sort of dabbled with food and beverage, only to believe very quickly that my destiny was probably not in food and beverage and probably in rooms. And I remember, at the time my headmaster sort of saying, I can't believe you're letting the side down. There's no one, everyone's going to university. Whereas, of course, I started, and I'm not sure I could do it again today. I think it was probably just timing. I think there's always a bit of luck, but I was just determined to sort of show that actually I could do this and actually have potentially a successful career in hospitality by taking potentially an alternative route to what others did.
Yeah, well, there's no right or wrong way to do it, right? I think the key thing as well is at that point, I think it's one thing to have that intrigue level as a kid, and it's wonderful that you kind of had that from a very early age. To be honest, from all the people that I've spoken to on this podcast, I can probably count them on one hand. But it's then another thing to go into it and then still have that connection to it, because obviously there could be worlds apart from what you think it's going to be and what it is going to be. So I guess fortuitous in some way, but again, fortune favours the brave. You've given it a go, and you're now. Were you immediately hooked?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I even then, which is probably a common theme to I think how to be successful in our business, is trying to meet people, build a relationship with someone that's more senior than you, and having the confidence to believe that actually you're going to learn something. And I remember between Sophia, the GM, there were a couple of other people that had been around at the Hyatt, and then I'll talk about the next hotel, but then the next place I went to. But I believe that actually if I could sort of learn from people and just ask what might be like really dumb questions, that would also help me maybe take a view on how do I get to where I want to get to. And I guess I suppose I was probably in the last of the people coming up through the business who could see general managers that were either from a food and beverage background or from a rooms background. And of course I was starting to ask myself questions. I'm like, well, is that the only way to become a GM or a leader of a business? And so right. I got a lot of insight from people, who had maybe a bit more open mind about actually, maybe in the future people won't be GMs that started in rooms or F&B.
Yeah. I suppose that inquisitive mind obviously seems to be playing a bit of a part here as well. There's a saying that somebody told me at the beginning of my career, which was the only stupid question was the one you didn't ask.
I completely agree.
Something like that. So yeah, it sounds like that, applying that methodology to your career in terms of maybe you're beginning to get a sense of who you want to become. You're already talking about leadership at that point. So now your brain is beginning to try and fill in the blanks of how do I get there?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting because I suppose if you look back then, as a boy from west of Birmingham, it's like, wow, it's the best hotel in the area. But I follow my mind about the world is beyond where I am today. So actually from there I ended up in some ways taking what on paper you'd sort of say was a really dumb thing to do, but I moved from the Hyatt with their blessing, because their structure was quite, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this.
Right, yeah.
And I ended up taking a role at the Grand Hotel in Birmingham, which actually later in my career, we actually had the opportunity with Principal to actually buy back that hotel after it being closed for years, right, and actually refurbish it, and after we'd sold it, reopen it. So, but when I worked there, it was the Grand was a sign versus actually Grand entitled Grand not in hotel, but taking on that sort of that sort of role around mentorship. The GM at the time, he was quite proud that I'd left the Hyatt to come, and I was like, oh my God, my uniform doesn't look as good as the old one, and the hotel's not as good. But he was one of those people that was a bit like, he said, and I think at the time I thought, wow, this is an amazing opportunity, but really I was missold. I was missold young and naive, and he was Portuguese, Mr. Constantino, and he said, Mr. Taylor, he said, I think you are ready to do nights, and so on nights you will learn a lot. And I thought I probably will, but clearly,
not wrong, yeah.
Actually, this was all aroused because really, I think what he had a night manager, but he clearly couldn't find anyone to basically cover the 2 days that the night manager
Right.
wasn't doing. So, at the time, I think I was a shift leader, and so I was so actually it was ridiculous but brilliant because I ended up doing 3 days on front desk in a supervisory role. I was doing 2 nights on nights. And of course, my body clock was completely shot because all of my friends, were sort of going, right, do you want to come to the pub? I'm like, no, actually, no, I need to get home and get changed to go to work, But rather than doing, a sort of as you probably see these days, 4 days on, 4 days off, or 5 and 2. I was like doing 3 days, 2 nights, and just dead for 2 days, trying to recover. But again, what it and it wasn't a calculated move. It's just more about, well, why not?
Yeah.
But then suddenly, you think about hotels, and I always joke about this with the teams today, and I'm like, where's the management of the hotel normally? It's like, well, they're all here from 8 on Monday till 6 on a Friday, and they'll probably pop in at the weekend. And then you think to yourself, actually, there's like 2 or 3 people covering nights, and you've got 350 guests. And I was young. I was young and had no idea. But you suddenly like, I'm in charge, and then all of the things that you go with being on nights versus being on days.
Yes.
And it's like
there's one thing that springs to mind, which is alcohol.
Alcohol, yes,
and people and the people they become under the influence.
yes, yeah. There's a couple of people who I remember quite vividly. One I'll just call Mr. Smith because it sounds like a good,
that's fair enough,
good generic name.
Yep.
And Mr. Smith, when I was on the day shift, whether that be on checkout or on arrivals, and he was a really lovely insurance broker from Liverpool. Yeah.
Oh, not that Mr. Smith.
So you met him. Anyway, this Mr. Smith, I think he was as shocked as I was when, of course, he didn't know I was on nights and appeared, in a dress on Tuesday with some company. So so
interesting.
It was probably that was probably my first sort of like, people come to hotels to do things they can't do at home. And if you can do it on expenses because you're working midweek, even better.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a bit of an eye opener.
But it's such a great training ground, though, isn't it? Like for life generally, especially as a young person. Like I still remember fondly my time on nights on cruise ships, which, as you can imagine, is you're talking about a hotel with 200, 300 bedrooms. You're talking about a moving piece of metal with a lot of people. And generally speaking, the age category was a little bit older, so you don't have super late nights. But some of the things that you see and therefore learn how to deal with when you're on nights, I would say to anybody who's wanting to have a career in hotels, do a stint on nights, even if it's just for 3 months. What you'll learn in that 3 months is just incredible.
100%. And when I was GM, when I became a GM, I was more conscious of the fact that actually I would, always go and see the night manager. The night teams always got left out when you had, staff events. So, certainly in my previous lives, and I'm continuing to be a great, sort of champion, is making sure that the nights teams are really looked after because, you don't have them on your leadership team, but frankly, they are the closest thing to your leadership team because they're either going to help you sleep or not sleep.
Yeah.
And that's pretty obvious, but I think a lot of people and a lot of leaders in hotels forget that.
Yeah, well, and why does somebody come and stay in a hotel apart from doing the things you can't do at home?
Yes, Mr. Smith.
Is for a good night's sleep, generally speaking, wherever you are in the world.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So from there at the Grand,
yes,
you're doing your stint on nights. Your 2 days, and a little bit all over the place. What happened next? Yeah,
so a couple of things happened. The deputy GM at the time had grown up in sales, and she sort of said to me, she said, have you thought about, you're really great with guests. Have you thought about potentially sales? And again, you, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you have this sort of this conditioned sort of thought on, if you want to be a leader in a business, you've got to go up an obvious route. And she said, you should think about this. And she said, but I think you're ready to do something else. And this is the brief version. I saw an advert in at the time it was the Hotel and Caterer magazine, and before the name was changed to the Caterer, and it was basically looking for simplistically junior salespeople to join. At the time, the company was called Jarvis Hotels, and great, founded by John Jarvis, obviously an amazing history with Hilton. assembled, a really fabulous senior leadership team. I don't think any of it one there would mind me saying that probably, the leadership team was probably better than quite a lot of the hotels, but
Right.
but it sort of felt like an opportunity to potentially to almost, the fact they were looking for, junior ops people to come and do, a field-based sales role, which again sort of took me out of my comfort zone because I've been used to, being in uniform, being in a hotel.
Yeah.
And I went for an interview process, and again, the guy I was working for, Adrian, he'd come through ops and ended up in sales. And so he was obviously a champion for sort of saying, no, it's actually, business leaders should come from sales. So I joined them and had a really fun couple of years. And from there joined Forte when Forte was still Forte Hotels before obviously Rocco took it back. Quite an odd time because it was sort of the back end of the period Granada owned it. And again, I wouldn't say I've been completely tactical, but I've been working on sort of business travel and corporate customers, and the role at Forte was actually more on the leisure side. And again, I've always, even to this day, I've always sort of maintained, whereas people would sort of say, I've done something there, logically you go for the more senior role, same category. Whereas I was like, I know nothing about leisure. That feels like something I should understand. And so zigzagged sort of, you could say, from Jarvis into Forte. And then I suppose that probably marked a point where I really, I was having a lot of fun. And I'm not suggesting I was like trying to map my, sort of route to general management, senior management. But I thought, okay, I actually probably need to have a bit of a plan here.
Right. Well, it's interesting to hear that because again, no perfect way to do this, but I think it is always useful to have some idea in the direction that you're heading. And I guess as well, at this point in time in your career, you're beginning, or you have had a bit more experience in a few different spaces. So you can now start to maybe see a path in your mind as to how you might actually get there, even though you're having fun at the same time.
Yeah, and I think, Phil, what happened was, and again, and I think, I think less so today, and I caveat that by saying that clearly, we talked about it before we started the interview, it is, the industry continues to be difficult to hire people, and certain parts of our business are even harder to hire into certain disciplines. But I sort of, I was based in Forte's head office. I really thought, okay, I really fancy getting into to a London hotel. But you can imagine, we're talking like late 90s. There was a huge amount of sort of snobbery about, particularly at the top end of the market, where if you were only going to get considered for a role if you would come from a place down the road which looked the same.
Yeah.
And so so I had at the time a couple of friends who worked with Terence Comran. And obviously at the time it was sort of like Cool Britannia, Comran was doing all of his restaurants, all those classics like, Mezzo and Quaglinos and such like. And there was suddenly this news about, Terence Comran opening his first hotel, which was going to be at Liverpool Street. And so I managed to get an interview, and the MD, amazing guy called Nicholas Retty, and Liz, the hotel manager, and sort of, I turned up, and probably they were trying to get recruiting a full team for an opening, which of course you've got a gun to your head. So maybe they were less probably focused on did you work down the road or which hotels but it was more about what can you bring, and
can you start?
Can you start? Can you roll your sleeves up?
Yeah.
And so that I sort of, again, none of this is strategic, to be clear, but I like the idea of being part of an opening, because I thought, actually, wouldn't it be great sort of to, rather than you're there and the hotel open 5 years, 10 years, 100 years before, you can actually be there at the beginning and really see how you should do it, how you should build it.
Yeah.
So I became part of that pre-opening team. We were sitting in an office the other side of Tower Bridge. It was always felt like the longest walk from Tower Hill to the office. And then suddenly we moved on site, and going back in the day, and I know you're a Liverpool Street commuter. Back in the day, there actually wasn't any hotels in the square mile. So the fact that you had Terence Comran, who was known for his design, known for his restaurants and bars, opening in sort of the square mile, where you had all the banks, the insurance companies, and this thing was
Can't really fail.
No, well, that was a theory, but it was also but also it was a time where and the city's changed, Canary Wharf's changed, but pretty much if you were senior and you did your day job at Liverpool Street, you did your work there, and if you were entertaining, you'd say, oh, let's go to St James's, let's go to Mayfair, and then we were collectively trying to open something which would really actually give people a reason to to want to be in the city. And so the fact it had 4 restaurants, 3 bars, it had a members club, which I guess some of the irony was that, if you were, a city banker, you would not be allowed into the members bar, because the idea at the time was to try and forge closer links with the artists that lived in Hoxton and Shoreditch and try and make the hotel feel more credible. So the doors opened. Again, there was half a playbook. I think there was probably a clear playbook on the restaurant side because Conran was there. On the hotel side, we sort of had a hunch of what we would do, and the doors opened, and
got a general idea.
Got general ideas.
Yeah, got some beds.
Yeah, we sort of the working theory was we'll be busy during the week and probably quite quiet at the weekend. That proved to be true.
Yeah,
and from there that was my first opening, and I guess if I track the last 20 years. I guess really what I've ended up doing in different guises, different roles, is lots of openings and repositioning of hotels. And I just, after the Great Eastern, I just got the bug. It was just, and it's...
Why do you think that is? Do you think that it's because there's an element of what you said earlier, perhaps, of you being able to get stuck in at the beginning of something, not have to come in and fix something that somebody else has done, I guess. But I know you've had lots of experience of that as well. But yeah, what do you think it is that kind of really sings to you about that?
In the main, I think that so Sean Wheeler, legend of the people world, who I know you've interviewed. Sean and I sort of came up with this analogy when we worked together about authors and editors and how different people are better suited to different roles. And I guess what we nicked that analogy from someone else, but we've used it, and I now still use it.
Yeah.
But if I'd have known that analogy, I suppose now translate it back to the Great Eastern. I think what you had were a load of people that were top of their game. People like Nicholas Retty, amazing guy, and you had lots of people that were like rising stars, fast tracked, and there were people that were winging it. But everyone was like committed, but they all had a vision for what this hotel was going to be. And the things are almost outside of the day job of, serving guests, servicing rooms, the sort of more cultural side, which actually would help position the hotel strategically. Mm. And I think for me, being part of that, you felt completely, you were drinking the Kool-Aid. And I think you always felt that by being there, I suppose 2 things. I always think if you do 2 years as part of an opening team, I think it's like probably potentially dog years. It's like the equivalent of 5 years being in another hotel, because it just happens, and you don't realise at the time, but you're like, okay, it's not working, right, pivot, what are we going to do next thing? And I think actually when you do an opening, and certainly I can, if I charted through all the openings and repositions I've done, you generally find that first team is the tightest team you're going to work with. And if I think about the Great Eastern, there's just a dozen people who are, I regularly keep in touch with, and they're people that I've ended up working with again, whether or not they've hired me, I've hired them. But you just have this sort of camaraderie of sort of everyone wanting to do the same thing. And I think, I'm not saying you can't get that when you are, the 6 management team going into an existing hotel, but it's just a different vibe. It's harder to maintain and pull that culture together. And that's what I guess, and that's probably where I got hooked on the opening thing, because I just saw it as something, I was like, this is really special. Yeah.
Plus, there's probably something deep within your psyche around the opportunity to get it wrong. And I mean that in the most positive way that you can mean something like that, in the sense that you're not going to purposely do something wrong, but actually, you can use all the logic and all of the statistics and all of the analytical work that you can ever get in the world. But when it comes to a new opening, there's still this element of you've got to kind of rip up the rule book and also see what happens.
Yeah.
And maybe that's that thing's always intrigued me, because there's always this, it's not even a fear of the unknown, it's almost welcoming that unknown quantity.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think I think the mistake I've always made, and probably particularly as I moved into more senior roles, is particularly if a great opportunity came up, I'd be the guy that has done the the 2.5 years hard graft, right, this the opening's longer, we're open, and you know that in the first 12 months, the P&L is going to be a nightmare. You're trying to work out how to balance right number of people in the right place, trying to get the right level of, quality, luxury, and then something comes up and you end up then handing the keys to somebody else, particularly when you're a GM and you're like, right, I'm going to go off and chop some more logs and here's a great hotel. Enjoy it. And I haven't quite managed to get to a point in my career yet where I actually just sort of sit back and just sort of go, isn't this great?
Yeah. Maybe it'll come. Maybe. So at the Great Eastern, what was your role there? What were you doing?
So I was in essence, I actually had 2 stints there. I actually, first time round, I was like an equivalent number 2 in sales.
Right.
And then from there, I ended up going to open the first Sofitel in London, and I went to open that as director of sales and marketing.
Right, okay. And that would be the St. James?
James, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's your first number 1 in inverted commas position within sales. How did you manage that transition, or did it just kind of feel like it came quite naturally?
Really good question, Phil. I think it was so I guess there's always a sort of twist to not necessarily my stories, but the experiences at the time, and you look back at it and go, wow, that was weird, or wow, that was really logical. And I guess, Sofitel, very, very different today, but the hotel, it's a stunning hotel, great location. Accor's at that point very different now with Ennismore and all the luxury stuff they're doing with Raffles, etc. But at the time, this was a big thing for Accor, because really, outside of this, great solid properties, but they're mostly Novotels, Ibises, etc.
Yeah, well, Sofitel at the time would have been their kind of only marquee brand, I guess.
Yeah, that was it. There was it. And I guess Meridian at the time was better known, so it was almost like it's the cousin, it's like the Accor cousin of Meridian. So I guess the fortunate thing was I went in, and because you were part of a big brand, you were less controlled than, for example, if you were in a Novotel, but you were ultimately part of a big brand. So you had a lot of people sitting at the head office who wanted to be involved with your hotel, particularly because it was, frankly, nicer than most of the other hotels at the time.
Right, well, flagship, we'll call it.
So I suppose to some degree I had a relatively small team, which allowed me to make mistakes, pick myself back up again, but equally have that central structure where if you didn't necessarily have all the answers, you can make mistakes, but equally you could go, listen, I really don't know what I'm doing on this here, or really, could someone help me out on this? And so I think actually that was a good environment to go in and actually sort of call it learn on the job, and of course, being a branded environment, there are a lot more SOPs and, things, you follow this map and, at least you won't go too far, off that way. And so it was a fun experience, and again, lots of fun, I guess I suppose, the outside of a great hotel, Fred Syriacs at the time was the brasserie manager.
Goodness gracious me!
Look at him now. He's on the TV, and the rest of us are still chopping logs. but it was again each time you did that opening, you were a bit like, what do I do next? What do I do next?
Yeah. Well, and I suppose as well, as a number 1, again, I use inverted commas in sales. It sounds like actually having the backup of a head office brand to be there and kind of capture you if you're stepping outside your comfort zone too far. It's actually was quite useful at that time for you, it sounds like. Yeah,
it was not, and I think that I was, again, I was fortunate that between the second GM there was an amazing guy, Hugh Jacquier, and he lives in Portugal these days, retired, and but again, he was always looking at, what can I do to support you? Not beyond, you making you a better person, but actually what are the tools you're going to need in your toolbox from a personal and professional development perspective? And certainly that's where, I met some people, people like Anne Stiles, who's a great lady, who does a lot of sort of mentoring, facilitation for salespeople. And, certainly ever since that point, as I work my way further up the greasy pole, of course, Anne would be my only go-to to help us with, creating great sales teams. So you learn, you're always trying to pick up things and go as you learn. But I guess it wasn't until later, which maybe we'll talk about later, but I realized that actually as I was progressing that, potentially there were some things that by not opting to go and do a degree, there was probably going to be some things that at some point I'd have to try and work out how do I fill out some of the gaps that I can't necessarily get by that sort of day to day on the job work.
Blagging it.
I'd like to say full. It was a little bit more than that, but probably more about no one hands you the book to say how to be a great manager. How do you become a great leader?
No, indeed, and in fact, you can't learn that in a classroom. You need the experience, right? You need to get that wrong, so that how next time when that situation comes up, you're in a better position to be able to deal with it, and that just comes with practice, really, not a book. Okay, so this was also, I suppose, still with the objective in mind that you had aspirations to. You're pretty heavily into aspirations now of becoming a GM. Is that?
I'll be honest. At that stage, I really wasn't sure. And I met there were a couple of really great people at Accor in the head office who I would call are just legends who had been up and down Park Lane, had been in every hotel as DOSM. And I guess maybe there was I'm not sure I was 100% clear in my mind, but I think I maybe had a bit of there is a possibility if I stay in sales, and I continue to stay in sales for probably about another 4 or 5 years, that I might just be, just to remain in sales, and particularly at a time, I was quite happy living in London. You could end up just going, okay, I'm going to the next hotel, better hotel, different hotel, opening hotel, and there could be an element of samey. So that definitely was logged in my head, Phil. But at the time, I took an opportunity to go and take over 2 hotels as DOSM. So at the time, it was the Carlton Tower and the Lounge in Knightsbridge.
Right.
Derek Pico, who was a GM at the time, really fun, great guy. Lots from him, and but I had this sort of thing. Maybe I had this. I don't know. Maybe I had this sort of reckoning in my mind where the Sofitel was a really good 5-star hotel. It wasn't trying to be the Savoy, but it was a really solid 5-star property. And I think maybe there was something in my mind. And I think I only had that once in my career where I probably thought maybe I should go and work somewhere that's it's in the top 10, somewhere I can see a different type of customer. And Derek at the time had moved from Forte Meridian, and I'd known him. I'd been seconded for a couple of months when I was at Forte out to Heathrow, which was another experience in its own right. And Derek was the GM there at the time.
You're saying that with a smile on your face. There's clearly a story there. But
there may be one for later. But
over a beer.
But I sort of felt I felt I really should go and if I've been at Sofitel, maybe this is the thing where maybe I should do what everyone said you can't do and go to the next thing. So I went over to work with Derek at the Carlton Tower. The hotel was owned by Dubai Holdings, but it was in that sort of slightly weird time where Jumeirah was obviously super well known in Dubai. The hotel had the Carlton Tower had historically been a Park Hyatt. And there was sort of debate about, should we put a Jumeirah branding on the hotel, shouldn't we? And the view was almost again, a lot has changed now, but at the time it was a case of, well, maybe the sort of potential Dubai ownership may not play out well when you're trying to get high-end travellers from North America. So, but what I had a lot of fun then. I think we achieved a great deal in a relatively short time. But I think what I recognised was, and I think it's really important for people that are working their way, through, our world, is actually if something's not right, you should call it and not be embarrassed or think that it's not the right thing. And I think what I realised was that at that particular moment in time, I just didn't really enjoy that. I'm going to call it traditional Knightsbridge luxury.
Okay.
It didn't resonate with me really well. Love the parking space in Sloane Street. That was good.
But that's a massively important part of building a career, though, isn't it? Is that it's very rare you find somebody who has made perfect choices every single step of their career journey. But actually, the ones that are in error, you take as much learning from those as you do from the ones that are perfect for you.
Yeah, I think so. And still really good friends with Derek to this day. But I could see the harder I was trying to do things probably the way I thought it should be done, I felt that probably I was working against probably the traditional way of how things needed to be done in a different world.
Right.
And actually, it was absolutely my decision. But I said to Derek, I said, I think I need to go back to a more more modern sort of luxury space.
Yeah.
So I actually ended up at the time, which had a twist. Nicholas Retty asked me to go back to the Great Eastern as DOSM. And again, I sort of, and I was always at the time, I was a bit like, well, do you go back somewhere twice? And he persuaded me and sort of said, well, actually, the role you're doing now compared to the role you did is fundamentally different. And at the time, Phil, the idea was that Terence would build on the successes of the Great Eastern and do more hotels.
Right.
But sadly, I think for probably a lot of the people that felt very strongly about this of Great Eastern, there were two shareholders, and the American shareholders decided they wanted to sell out, and so we ended up selling the hotel, ironically, to Hyatt.
Indeed, yes.
So I sort of we were all kept on, but it was obviously clear with obviously my early endeavours of Hyatt. I was interested to see what they thought about it, and I think. Today we know the hotel as Andaz, and obviously Andaz is a really great brand, and obviously is all over the world. But at the time they bought the hotel, they were really not sure what brand it would fit into.
Right.
And so I was getting married that year, and a good friend of mine, Simon, who actually worked at the Great Eastern early doors and runs a very successful restaurant business, had sort of he sort of said to me, he said, he said, I'm going to do a restaurant at this new concept called the Hoxton. And he said, and Sinclair and Beecham, who was co-founder of Pret a Manger, really needs someone to help him. And Stephen, who at the time was the opening GM. So, I was sort of thinking, okay, I'm not really sure where this whole Hyatt thing leads in terms of, I guess my baby that I've been with twice.
Yeah.
And so I sort of, I went up and met Sinclair and Stephen, and they were like, right, it's July. We need to open this thing in mid-August. We've got a few roles filled.
Cool.
And it was a case of, he says, and Sinclair was brilliant. And, he was a bit like, he said, today you are a director of sales and marketing of a very large team in a quite fancy hotel. He said, this is going to be a really fun hotel. And I'd like you he said, we can work out what you want to be called, but I just need someone who's going to do stuff.
So let's call it as it is.
Yeah, exactly. So we, that's definitely the quickest I've ever opened a hotel. And Sinclair had amazing vision, because he was someone, obviously, if you go back to when he created Pret with Julian Metcalf, who obviously these days runs Itsu. And you hear the stories of, Julian making the sandwiches, Sinclair on the till. And Sinclair had this sort of vision for this, we always used to joke and say, like, the original Hoxton was like, a Premier Inn on steroids. It's sort of, it was built in the same fashion as you would have frankly, a budget hotel. Mm. But then he had a really, really clear vision of what he wants to do with the public spaces and the restaurants, and, getting away from hotel rip-offs, like expensive telephone calls, minibars. But he had a clear vision in mind. But in terms of actually opening the hotel, it was like, crikey, we got to get this done in a month. So
yeah,
it was.
Don't you like an opening?
I do like an opening, Phil. I do like an opening. And actually, it's probably then. I think probably I probably became aware of, surreptitiously that, and particularly when, we had a gun to your head, we were opening this thing in a month.
Yeah. And
I was like, right, I really need people around me who are frankly better than me, because if we're going to try and do everything, just having lots of people looking for direction is not going to work. So I managed, my wife at the time was working for Malmaison, and she had a great sales coordinator called Olivia, and I managed to persuade Olivia to come over, and my wife seemed okay about that. So I was like, great, we got someone to join me in sales. And
the marriage is safe.
Yeah, exactly. And then we started to build up this team. The hotel opened. You may recall that, we did some really crazy stuff like the £1 sale, which was this sort of...
God, I forgot
which I look back at now, like, I start to feel, start sweating. But there was stuff that just really broke the mold of frankly, hotels. And we got it open, and, the place got busy quite quickly. And, when I'd started talking to a few of the corporate customers from the Great Eastern and said to them, how do you feel about, using the Hoxton? And they were like, where's that? I was like, well, come out Liverpool Street, turn left instead of turning right.
Yeah.
And it took a real period of time, because I was a bit like, Shoreditch? We can't have our guests stay in Shoreditch. But over the first few months, it started to get busy. And Stephen then announced he was going to go and take on another role. And Stephen had been for years with IHG, a real legend. He's a great guy. And I remember sort of Sinclair sitting me down, and I genuinely thought, because Sinclair always said to me, look, I probably can't afford your salary, so after a few months, we'll have to have a grown-up conversation about what happens next. So I sort of went into this conversation thinking, right, basically I'm now being cut off the payroll.
Yeah.
And Sinclair, because he wasn't a traditional hotelier, he said, I've been thinking about this. He said, I think you should be the general manager. I said, why do you think that? He said, well, I've never understood why hotels generally have general managers that grow up in food and beverage or rooms, when actually, if you don't have any top line, it's irrelevant about your rooms and your F&B because you've got no customers.
Yeah.
And in a really perverse way, Phil, I'm not too deep on this stuff, but it linked me all the way back to almost the beginning of my thought process about maybe you don't need to be coming from a traditional, sort of F&B or rooms background to become a GM.
Yeah.
So
that's called innovation, isn't it? I mean, at its heart.
Yeah, but in Sinclair's mind, forget me as David, but in his mind, it was completely intuitive that someone with a good commercial, handle on the hotel should be the GM.
Yeah.
And that really was, and I guess, probably if you've got markers in your career of like, okay, and that was clearly, and I ended up staying at the Hoxton for 6 years.
And as you say as well, coming back to a comment you made in that whole piece there around, you had made it clear to yourself that you needed to surround yourself with people who were better than you in certain things. Is that not leadership right there, though, in that kind of nutshell?
I know it is now, but I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
I just thought, shit, if we don't have good people around us.
People to make me look a bit better than I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the wonderful thing about that period of time was I always say to people, it's like, I felt like I was on a gap year for 6 years.
Right.
My gap year extended out because we had so much fun and the hotel achieved amazing things. And we were fortunate that, I think when people think about Shoreditch, and today we're sitting in Shoreditch, but Shoreditch back in 2006, 2007, was very different to Shoreditch today. And when you look at some of the challenges facing our industry today, which are funny enough the same challenges back then, we still have this image issue about how to get people to come into our business. And the great thing about an environment like the Hoxton, because we were sort of to some degree making up as we go along, and Sinclair had this really amazing ability just to ask really difficult, awkward questions, which and it was really good for me because if you grew up in a hotel business, you're like, I this is how I do it. This is how I do it.
Yeah.
And Sinclair was clearly a world class entrepreneur, and so
just would ask why.
Yeah, and that was it. And and Sinclair couldn't deal with anything. I don't think you mind me saying this, but he couldn't deal with anything which was on more than one piece of paper. And if he didn't understand something, he'd be like, "No, I don't understand. Simplify it. No, I don't understand. Simplify it." Right. So it was actually a really good way to sort of, and it's helped me, I think, later in my career just to actually to constantly untangle things that either I don't understand or things where I think people are using BS and jargon if they don't actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think because you and I talked before an interview about getting people into the business, and I think one of the things we could just do there because we ultimately it was Sinclair's Sinclair was leading the business. He felt very strongly about, we really need to hire people that, don't know that hospitality could be a great job. And so we did the obvious stuff. And you generally found that, obviously I always think, hotels are the most wonderful melting pot of people from, all different backgrounds, nationalities. But we really felt strongly that, on the one side of Shoreditch, you had, the shining lights of the city. And on the other side of Shoreditch, you have some of the most deprived parts of London. And so we took it upon ourselves. We sort of thought, right, let's create an apprentice scheme. And we worked with an organisation at the time called Shoreditch Trust, and we came up with this apprentice scheme. We were, again, fairly naive in terms of probably what we thought we'd get out of it. And I said to Sinclair, I said, look, I think going into this, we need to be really, eyes wide open. We're not going to have a high success rate. But in Sinclair's mind, he was like, that's fine, because we're going to help people. And even if we get a couple of people at the end of it who end up staying with us, then we succeeded.
Yeah.
And if we end up with a couple of people who come to hotels and actually they decide that they don't want to do hotels, but we put them into employment and then they then go and do something else, we've equally succeeded.
Yeah, great way to look at it.
Yeah, and that was really great. And at the time, I look back at it, and we had some amazing trainees. We had a few issues sort of going through it. Because again, we were ultimately trying to take some really, super kids, in essence, off the streets, and trying to, put them into something which could be a long career for them.
Yeah, and I suppose at the time as well, you could totally do that in Shoreditch because effectively there's no rules there. I mean, I don't mean that's no disrespect to the area at all, but then if you take the more established areas of London at that time, they're less likely, probably in principle, to take a risk like that.
Yeah, I think, and I think, but it's really interesting. Even today, I think that if I just look at today, the context of my current role, the people we hire at the hotel in Shoreditch are very different to the team we have at Sea Containers, and what they want from the role, what they want from a work-life balance is very different. So I think equally, even today, you can see that depending on where you are in London and how you're trying to hire and how you hire different people that maybe don't have a hotel background, that does then also, you end up with, some really great positives about that. But it's also like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that when I started hiring in this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
A very quick word, if you'll permit me. Providing great customer service is all about having the right people in the right place at the right time. And that's exactly where our sponsor, RotaCloud, can help. RotaCloud makes managing your team's rotas, attendance and annual leave easy. With its simple drag and drop planner, you'll be creating rotas for your team in minutes. While its built-in budgeting tools mean you'll know exactly how much you're spending on staffing before sending the rota out. One RotaCloud customer actually reported that they'd gone from spending 25% on their monthly turnover on wages to spending just 19%, all thanks to RotaCloud's intuitive rota planning software. So do your business a favour and head over to rotacloud.com/Phil to start your 30-day free trial and find out how much easier organising your team can be. Now let's get back to it.
So 6 years there.
6 years there. So there was quite a big group of shareholders, and because you had Sinclair was really leading the business, but ultimately there were a lot of other shareholders, and I think there was a private equity firm involved, Bridges Ventures, who were also almost at that point in our investment. They're saying, look, if we can't do a lot more of these quickly, we need to exit our position. So it was decided that the hotel was going to be sold.
Right.
So my second hotel sale, which again for people coming up through the industry is something you don't think you're going to be dealing with, but you do.
Yeah.
And we started meeting some people, and actually I met two people that will later have an influence on roles that I've been in. The first one was Ian Schrager. And Ian,
nobody's heard of him.
No, I was going to say some. I think he maybe had a couple of hotels.
Two-bit hotelier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the godfather of the boutique hotel basically came to tour the hotel with a view of buying it to put into what is today his public hotel collection, of which he's got a place in New York. And Ian, charismatic, lots and lots of stuff. I was like blown away because it's like you're talking to a megastar, in our world.
Yeah.
And I remember Ian saying to me at the end, he's a bit like, if we buy it, you stay. If we don't buy it, you need to come to audition. And so
you can see where we're going here.
There is a link. There is a link. So it was funny how it all played out, and this again is a lesson of these things, and certainly probably People talk about politics, and politics can be seen to be quite a bad thing. But there are politics in every business, regardless of size. But what I could see that the hotel was not going to be sold quickly. I had met the guy that eventually ended up buying it, Sharan Pastricia, who's obviously now took the Hoxton and exploded it into what it is today, and obviously with the creation of Ennismore. But I decided that I couldn't see a sale, and as much as I was loyal to Sinclair and the other shareholders, I just didn't see how it was going to play out, Phil. And I guess as much as I say it was amazing fun 6 years, I needed more. And I've been fortunate that during that time I had applied for and was given a Master in Holders scholarship. And the great thing about this sort of scholarship was that in my mind, I thought this would help with, and again, I've always been very conscious of probably where I'm at. I thought this would really help me because if I was awarded it, which I was successful to get, it would maybe help fill some of the gaps of maybe a more classical, sort of degree education.
Yeah.
So there were two courses for this. There was Cranfield, which obviously has people from all industries, and there was Cornell, which has all the wonderful hoteliers who discuss, who can do the best fruit basket. I'm being flippant, but I felt for me, I'd get more from being, with people that had similar jobs, but not necessarily in the hotel business. So that really helped me, and that helped solidify in my mind that actually I now needed to do the next thing after the Hoxton. So as I mentioned, so Ian made his comment. I was approached then formally, and of course you had the sort of yo-yo of Marriott and Edition, and Ian was adamant that he wanted non-Marriott people to come in to do the three, I'm going to call it flagship Edition hotels. One being London, which opened first, second being Miami Beach, and the third one being New York.
Wow!
And so, going through the going through the sort of you can imagine I've been sort of in the independent space for a while, and going into the Marriott sort of recruitment recruitment regime, and psychometric tests, profiling, felt like 27 interviews, and I knew that I had Ian as almost like my champion in the background, but I didn't also want him to be like the only reason I got in here was because of him. But I managed to get into into sort of Edition, and it was sort of funny because it's sort of the first two editions had not gone well for a number of reasons.
Right. Good foundation then.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, just Google early editions. And so there was a huge amount of pressure because Marriott had put billions on its balance sheet to basically open these three editions to show the world that actually Edition is a great brand, and it could obviously as a primarily a manager versus an owner brand that could go far. So I came on board. I was given a bit of a this is what you need to do. And I sort of, I turned up at Marriott's head office in Fetter Lane. It's like red everywhere, and they sort of said to me, "This is John. He's going to be a HR director. You won't understand Marriott, so he's going to fill in the gaps. And he's just come from St Pancras, so therefore, he's done something which is more lifestyle than we normally do. Go figure."
Yeah, well, that was a hell of an opening for him there as well. But that's a whole different story, which we've already covered on this podcast. But so you met John.
Yep. So met John, and we were really lucky. And I'm not going to paint it all as sort of rainbows and fairies, but because there was this, I guess, ultimate, I won't say fear of making sure this thing was successful, we were given all the resources we need. And I genuinely think that we got the best of Ian and we got the best of Marriott. And the great thing was that Marriott already had the Ritz-Carlton platform. And so they allowed us to sort of really to dive into, we know how strong they are on culture. We know how strong they are on training. So it allowed us to really to tap into that sort of Ritz-Carlton service and really, modernise it into what we wanted Edition to be.
Yeah.
And
is it Ritz-Carlton that has the ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, they had the sort of like they've got their credo. We had a black card, which is a bit, it's a bit more like the black Amex, but it was, but again, a lot of the sort of thought that had gone into creating the value sitting behind Edition, there was very definitely a quite definitive nod to, Ritz-Carlton who really do that well.
Yeah.
So it was, I could talk for hours about it, but I guess, as a highlight, it was, we got the ability to hire the most amazing people. It was lots of fun. And, you just imagine Marriott has job codes and, we were hiring like a director of nightlife, lobby, all the things that you don't have in it. Yeah. So it really was the most, I think, I'm biased, but the most epic opening, which not only I think allowed Marriott to show that Edition could be a credible brand in the future, and look how many hotels there are today.
Yeah,
and sure. I think that thread has continued through. But I also think for Ian, who I still consider someone I look up to, I see him when I'm in New York. I think for Ian, I think he was really proud of the fact that we nailed the service. Because I think he'd always managed to create these these amazing experiences and spaces. But I think that and it was always there was this sort of thing about, Marriott and Ian, like, the unlikely couple. But I think actually what Ian recognised was that we could, through, like platforms training through Ritz-Carlton and some of the other things we used, we actually could nail the service. And I remember, him sort of walking in, and there's probably the visit after the opening party, which we'd done during Fashion Week, all the glitz and glamour, and I could just see there was like a smile on the corner of Ian's face, where you could just look around, you could see he was proud of the fact that not only did everyone look great, the place felt great, but actually the service was like spot on. And I think that, and it was quite nice to see that in a legend like Ian, who could really see that it was like great service, nailed.
Yeah, and for an opening, again, it's one of the things that is tough to get absolutely nailed on from day one.
Absolutely.
So that begs the question then: how did you do that?
I if you took the sort of like the mindset of a traditional org chart, we sort of we were quite strategic about where do we want people that have got good old-fashioned experience. In other words, if you need a really good bartender, then you may not need the whole bar team to be to have worked at the American bar, but you're going to have some backbone and substance there.
Yeah.
So we literally mapped out almost where did we want people to come from, and I think and again I think it's much more commonplace today. But we hired an art gallery on Charlotte Street, and we did, like, we screened people, and the whole thing sounded slightly ridiculous at the time. You're a bit like, oh yeah, it's Charlotte Street on, I don't know, it could have been a Wednesday night. Who's going to walk in? But we found that people were a bit, so and again, social media. We're talking, we're not talking light years behind, but lots moved on. But we were trying to build up almost a oh, it's a gallery, just go along for drinks. You were just randomly picking people, talking to people. We had a bit of buzz in hotels, and all these people turned up, and in essence, we just had conversations with them.
Right.
And throughout these conversations, they had a picture taken of them, and someone's job to make some notes. And then we sort of recapped and sort of said, they were great. And I'll give you, one of the best examples was we had our pre-opening office in Charlotte Street. There was one of the guys who basically was giving out flyers for the Easy Gym, which was terrible, but he was the most passionate guy about, this gym, giving out flyers by the tube station. And I remember saying to John, I'm like, if he's that passionate about a really lousy gym, we should put him on the door. So of course we hired him, put him on the door. 3 years later, it was still there.
Right.
And everyone,
right.
He was talking to everyone. Everyone walked past, morning. And it was just, I think we just, I'm not trying to say we're rocket scientists, but we just looked at it differently and just thought about, rather than hire the doorman from a traditional hotel who's just going to moan that the tips aren't as good because this is an opening hotel versus a hotel that's been open for 20 years.
Yeah.
We were like, the guy from giving out the flyers for the gym, he's going to be really proud to work out, at this hotel where he's part of something from the very beginning, going back to my opening analogy from earlier. And that's just where that's really where it hit off.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of, as you say, get the backbone and foundation in play, but then branch out and do different things with everything else.
Yeah, and I really clearly I still do now, and there's always, I guess, if you go back pre-COVID, there's always this noise about 0 hours contracts, but we were really we had a great lady called Claudia. She was Australian, she was fabulous, she was sassy, but she had a kid, and that meant that she was restricted by the number of hours, and it sounds quite normal today, but back then, and it was like, well, could she not work 40 hours? And John, who was a great champion with this, was like, no, but she's going to be bloody brilliant between 10 and 3:30. And guess what? We have a lot of people walking through on the way to the restaurant, on the way to the bar, coming in. So rather than have some sort of surly door person, you had Claudia greeting you, who was just fabulous. And again, that's where probably I think at the time we just let stuff that instinctively felt right happen, and it proved to work.
Yeah, it also shows you, I suppose, that you can't do that alone. You need other minds to get on board with that and then deliver that. It's one thing to say it out loud, but it's another thing to actually action it. Yeah,
but interestingly, because actually this came up a couple of weeks ago, but the one thing we maintained we would do, and again with the GMs today, it's something I feel really strongly about, was that myself or Edwin at the time, the hotel manager, we met every person before we hired them. Which sounds like, oh my God, how do you do that? But we would literally have a bit like a doctor's surgery on a Friday. They knew that from 10 till 2 or 10 till 4, we would be in and around the offices, and if they've got candidates they've met, they want to fast track into the business or get people to come and work for us. But then we would sign off on it, just because we felt it was really, really important that the people that came into the business, as you have been open for a little while.
Yeah, you don't,
and also you don't dilute the talent you're bringing in.
Yeah,
and that was really successful.
Yeah. So you had a lot of fun there
Fun.
as well, and not just in London. As well, you were also involved in overseas projects as well.
Yes. So we, because London, I think, has been proved to be successful. We were, I guess, we were the poster child. I should caveat poster child one of one. So it wasn't exactly.
Well, it wasn't. Let's start somewhere.
Exactly. So quite a few of us had the opportunity to get involved with the opening of both Miami Beach, which is a really epic place, still is today, and New York. I was quite heavily involved with Miami, as was John and quite a few of the other leadership team.
Very different marketplace.
Yeah, and look, we knew nothing about John had worked before in Florida. I'd not worked in the States, so again for me it was a real eye opener, and again it opened up a bit of maybe I'd quite like to do something with an international lens. But we couldn't sort of dictate the Miami market, and it's very, very different, to the extent that we seemed to get a sort of stickiness with people we were hiring in London, whereas South Beach, what we all learned was that as soon as the new hotel comes up, however much they like where they're working, they'll move down the road for $2 more an hour.
Right.
So it's quite a different, trying different ways to try and get people sort of on that cultural journey. But so again, it was a bit of the same way we looked to the Ritz-Carlton openings team to help us deliver a really solid opening. I think the team from the Miami Beach edition, looked to us in terms of how we could help on the cultural side of things, and it played out really well. And then John ended up doing. I did a little bit on the New York property, but John did more as he was around for longer.
Right. Yeah. So how long were you with Edition in total?
It's quite a long pre-opening, probably three and a bit years, but it was more. It was a very long pre-opening. And probably a couple of years all in all with the opening. Yeah.
Okay, and what happened next?
So I was having a great time, and I was sort of trying to work out what's next. There was a very strong pull for to stay with Edition, and my daughter was quite young. She was just starting nursery, and it was one of those things about what do we do? I had an intro made to a gentleman called Cody Bradshaw from Starwood Capital, and I guess there's a nuance between Starwood Hotels and Starwood Capital, but Starwood Capital is obviously founded by Barry Sternlicht, but is more the financial side, and they had, amongst other things, bought a portfolio, actually probably coming through the financial crisis of 2008-2009, of multiple hotels from around the UK, which has in some cases seen better days, probably had less definition, and Cody had this master plan with Barry Sternlicht to try and sort of take this very large number of hotels and try and divide it into almost like two buckets, for simplistic terms. One bucket being a group of city centre hotels, and the second bucket being a group of leisure, conference, golf hotels, and so Cody sort of approached me and said, are you really happy at Edition? I was like nodding my head furiously, and he was like, okay, I've got an opportunity for you. You're either going to want to just remain being a GM, and that's fine. And if that's the case, really enjoyed our conversation. Or potentially, would you like to come in where you've got multiple hotels, and we're going to be, it's not going to be as clean as an opening. There will be probably openings. We'll probably close one hotel to fully reopen it, but everything else will be, sort of almost open heart surgery as you go. And how do you fancy it?
Yeah.
I suppose I mulled it over, and again, it's probably a bit like the analogy I gave about the sales and marketing. Do I want to be the sales and marketing guy? It's just going around and around. And I love being a GM, and I've always joked with Vicky, my wife, that my fallback if it all goes wrong is, well, I suppose, two fallbacks: London taxi driver, because I think I quite I'm quite good on the road.
Been here a while now.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Or ultimately, go back and be a GM because it's just a great job.
Yeah.
But it sort of felt like a crazy opportunity. There was a. I think I got the best of both worlds because I got to best of both worlds and best of both worlds where I got to work with the Starwood Capital guys who are really visionary and like in Schrager, Barry Sterling has an amazing vision, and you look at what he's doing today with Baccarat, with Treehouse, with One Hotels. He's still doing that and running in a hugely successful finance private equity firm. And on the other hand, I really, outside of my early experience in Birmingham, I knew nothing at all about the provincial market, and so this sort of role straddled an existing management team led by Tony Troy, who's been around, to use his word. Yeah, so Tony's words, has been around the racetrack a few times. Yeah. So you had sort of the operating platform on one side, and you had Starwood on the other side, and in essence, the hotels performed really, really well, but ultimately, what Starwood was trying to do is to build up a collection which allowed them to sort of parcel it up so that if potentially when they needed to crystallize their investment, they could sell someone a dream, either as what we would later create, or potentially someone who can take this platform and slot it in somewhere else, which is what in essence happened. Yeah. So I walked in, and it's really interesting. A coach I've worked with for a long time. I used him. I got to use him probably more when I was at Edition, so I talked to him about this job, and I talked to him about what I was thinking about it. I'd asked him what he thought, and and he described a transition curve, as he called it, and he said, you're going to start a job. He said, you've ran one hotel, but now you're starting to spin plates because you've got 4 or 5, and they're all in renovation. You've got team members that don't really quite know the journey you want to go on. There's team members that are quite happy where they are. He said, you'll get to a point where all the things that have made you successful up to now, you'll keep doing that, and then you'll then realise that actually none of this is working, and then you'll start to dive.
Right, interesting, yeah.
Which I always talk to people about this transition curve, because I think it's actually quite relevant to most people when they start a new job. Now, the trick to the transition curve. So I said to David, the coach, I was like, so how do I get out the hole? He was like, quickly, ideally. so it was a really good sort of good lesson. But what I went from was this probably quite safe zone of being a GM in a hotel, obviously having some fun, opening up the Miami stuff, and then suddenly I'm responsible for taking a load of hotels which have been successful in their own rights, but then taking them on a journey which looked very, very different to where they were.
Yeah, well, and where you were.
Exactly. Well. Yeah. So there were some moments, probably in some of the early days when I was walking around. Arguably, you love all your children equally, Phil, of course, but the Palace in Manchester, which was sort of like this wonderful hotel, but you sort of walk around and go, God, how are we ever going to? What are we going to do with this thing? Yeah, it was sort of like The Shining in a few of the corridors. But I was both with Tony and with Cody from Starwood. They gave me carte blanche to build the team I needed to get the job done. And so Sean Wheeler, I'd always I managed to prize Sean out of the Dorchester collection with some help from a couple of people. And, Simon, who actually had worked with me back at the Great Eastern, came in to be our brand director. We had some young talent. We built this, and I was always really clear, people are better than you. So the fact I managed to get Sean to, come and, leave this fabulous job at the Dorchester, I was like, Sean, come on, it's going to be great. Yeah. Honest, yeah. No, it will be great. That's somewhere down the road. But it allowed us to, and I guess probably different to what I described to you earlier in terms of the, this opening, much, much harder because, we were trying to sort of like unravel a culture. There's nothing wrong with that culture. It just wasn't where we needed it to be for the new, for what we eventually, termed as principle. Yeah. And so we had to come about it a very different way, and with an opening, you've got loads of people that are all, you're all there. It's like, we're all there, we're all drinking a Kool-Aid and we're all going the same direction. And what we found, and I know Sean would say the same thing, was, we'd sort of go in and go, here's the new music and please learn the music and this is the direction we're going and it's going to be great. And then you'd leave and they'd all go, well,
putting the heavy metal back on, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I'm quite happy with what we're doing at the moment, thank you.
Yeah.
And they went back for 3 weeks, so we'll just find that music in 3 weeks again.
Yeah.
So we went through this whole sort of, not only the physical, upgrade of hotels in York, in Manchester, 2 in Edinburgh, 2 in Glasgow, but then the cultural sort of reinvention and because these hotels, they were great commercial hotels, but there was no employee branding, no employee feeling. We proposed this idea of creating something which we called Project 1898. So it was almost like the sort of the wrapping paper to describe something. And in essence, we were trying to get people to buy into a culture because we didn't have a product to show them of what it was going to be.
Right.
And so when we were talking to people, whether that be, a great example, I think I know you've had him on your show, Matt Townley. Matt Townley's got a really good job, great pedigree of Malmaison. I'm like, Matt, come and join us. It's going to be amazing. He's like, what am I signing up to? So we realised we had to sort of almost build an employee brand which would help hook people into our vision.
Yeah.
And then almost then as hotels sort of came off the production line from a refurbishment point of view, then people would go,
yes.
So and that was a really great lesson because, I remember at the time I did have some sort of healthy debates about, why are you spending all this money on this? This brand is going to be defunct in 12 or 18 months. It was like, yeah, but that's the point. We need to bring people in now to, to start drinking the Kool-Aid and get them bought into it. And actually the difference there compared to, let's say, with an opening was that we actually decided that, we sort of went through the organisation and we weren't talking the senior guys because we made quite a lot of change in terms of leadership. But we decided that, that there's always going to be like a stalwart who's in, on breakfast, or it could be the person that runs the employee restaurant. And that they are the most cynical people who've seen it all before. 10 general managers have been through this hotel since I've been here.
Yeah.
So Sean and I said, I think we should basically make them our culture gurus. and we thought about this and we thought, this is...
Was that on the back of 10 pints or something like that?
No, it was very good red wine. Sean would say it was Malbec. But we sort of thought it was complete reverse psychology. We thought, actually, if we can get the people who are the naysayers to help drive the new culture, then all the others are just going to follow.
Going to come with, yeah.
So that's what we did. So
right. Yeah, so bold thinking
bold,
again.
Yeah,
though.
bold thinking. Yeah, and from there, fast forwarding, we sort of hurtled through, reopening. We launched a principal brand in Manchester and pulled off, an opening party which probably almost rivaled the London edition. And then we opened the flagship Principal London in Russell Square. And it was really interesting because it's this I used the analogy earlier about authors and editors, and we were sort of authors moving into an editing world, and at the same time Starwood had announced that they wanted to sell the business, and so it was quite a conflict in some ways because I was trying to sort of keep all the things, the purity of what we're trying to create with the Charlotte Square in Edinburgh, which was a fab hotel, what we're doing with London, but at the same time I was getting sort of moved into this. You really need to help us sell the dream to the next person.
Yeah.
And
I do remember Sean talking about that actually when we had our chat. That it's an interesting time because you have to put on a lot of different hats, a lot of different people to satisfy in that process, and it's very difficult to do that if there's no one clear direction. As it were. Yeah,
and I think, Phil, I think it's really, it's really hard because, we, again, as the sort of, I remember, stuffing all the things that were going to go into the tuck box, which is a principal brand standard, and also there were so many memories of creating this thing, and over the shot of my shoulder, I knew that the most likely buyer was going to be somebody who would go, thanks for what you've created. We'll take the best bits, but we actually have got a different view of what we want to do.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, what happened, obviously, as well reported, was that the hotels were sold to Covivio, which was a French investment fund, and then they gave basically assigned leases and management contracts to Intercontinental.
Yeah.
So I Intercontinental. IHG, they genuinely liked what we did and how we did it. They had gaps because they wanted to get Kimpton into the European market, so that they saw that the principals in London, in Manchester, in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, Blytheswood could easily slot into become Kimptons quite easily. The George, which had earlier been an Intercon, became an Intercon again in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And then they were working on a couple of other brands where they started slotting in the sort of the remainder of the other hotels. But and I think I stayed with them for probably about 18 months, and I committed to do that because I wanted to. I'd worked really hard to assemble a really epic team, as had Sean. We weren't going to force people to stay there, but I equally thought that if people like Sean and I left as the sale took place, that sort of really didn't sit well with me in terms of all the people that have been on that journey with Principal. And actually, if you roll the clock forward, obviously Sean's a good example. He had his own plan, which obviously you've discussed with him previously.
I did, yeah.
And I'd say half the group have stayed with IHG and half the group have gone off and done different things, amazing things, and the people that stayed with IHG have done really, really well, either continuing on this portfolio or going into other areas. But I felt for me, I felt that it was really critical that the people that had helped the success of the business, that I didn't just sail off into the sunset. But at the same time, after 18 months, I knew that having built something like that, you see there's an obvious point, I think, where you see that someone wants to take it in a different direction, and I didn't want to be the person that's going, well, you should be doing this. I think there's nothing wrong with when we did it. So I sort of almost pre-agreed a period of time I'd stay with them, knowing that then if you get to the end of that period of time, you're not
it's
sort
no
of
surprised.
There's no surprise. There's no emotion about it. That obviously coincided just about when Boris locked us all down for COVID.
Oh, crikey, it was right then.
Just before that,
yeah. But I suppose the thing about that is it's kind of what you spoke about earlier on. If something's not right, call it. And and if that's something you've got to get right internally, then that's the most important thing. But if you can already see that this is actually probably not going to be the thing for you anymore, then discuss outwardly. Don't just keep it all to yourself.
I think and I've said to my wife, and don't get me wrong, the period in Principal was very, very stressful because everything was like lined up together, and there was only so many morning short at 6:30. We're at King's Cross. How much longer can we do this for? Because we were on the road every week, for that whole period of time. And I was probably just a bit knackered, and actually, I said to my wife, I said, I quite fancy a few months off now. I just feel like I need to recharge, and she was like, yeah. Well, as soon as you get a call, you're going to take a job that suits you, because she knew I wouldn't be able to do it, and almost the timings are sort of slightly out, but actually, I before I'd finished up, I was then approached about the role I'm now in.
Yeah, indeed. You didn't start as CEO, did you? You came in as COO, is that
COO,
correct?
Yeah. So if I go back to my Hoxton story, one of the other people that I showed around alongside Ian was in essence the guy I now work for, and he had looked at the Hoxton as an investment opportunity. It didn't end up doing it, but I was approached by a headhunter. I was approached about in essence a role as COO, which again for me attracted me because it was London based. There was going to be, and I say going to be because there were a couple of hotels in the pipeline, but it was going to have hotels in the UK, in Amsterdam, and in the US. And I thought, brilliant, this is this is a London. I like living in London. It suits us from a family perspective. I can pull on people and hopefully build a team that maybe I've worked with, plus some new people which can sit in London, and quite like the idea of doing something which is not just London, because I've done that for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So I was in a process, and as you can imagine, everything was sort of moving, sort of either at sort of like rapid speed or no speed. We were all locked down, and So, I'd been hired for the role of COO, and then the CEO had decided he wanted to move on. And so I'd sort of gone from these moments of, do I have a job? Am I going to start a job? And obviously I could see that, this was at a period of time where so many decisions were having to be made, needed to be made.
Yeah.
And so in essence, my sort of baptism of fire sort of started, last week in April, where in essence I sort of came in as COO, but the COO had left by that stage. And then ultimately I was trying to figure out, how do we do it? What do we do? And it's, I'm really fortunate. I work for a great organisation. It's a family organisation, so different mechanism to working for an entrepreneur or for a big group. And you could say the rest is history.
Indeed. Well, you're making your own history now with the group, because when you took on the role, they didn't have this property that we're sat in right now.
That's right.
Certainly,
yeah.
Maybe it was in motion at the time, but it certainly wasn't open for business.
So ignore the obvious opens and closings of COVID.
The time,
but as we sort of got going, we had Sea Containers, we had the Pulitzer in Amsterdam, we had the Kimpton DeWitt, which is a great property, and Riggs in Washington had opened literally a couple of weeks before the pandemic and then shut. So that was almost an opening. And then we had a second property in Washington, D.C., which we were, in essence, refurbishing, creating the brand, onboarding, pretty much all the way from 2020 through to 2021, which feels like a very long time ago. And we managed to find a loophole where a couple of us could actually get into the US, bearing in mind the US airspace was closed.
Of course, yeah.
So we managed. We pretty much did the Lisle opening, remote. But actually, it proves some things can work, remotely, because it was a great opening. And then to your question about here, so the group had owned the Ace Hotel Shoreditch since around 2015, and by the time COVID hit, I think the view was we met with the guys from Ace and said, what's the next thing? And they had a view of what the next thing was, and I'd say it was very I'm very respectful of what Ace did, and this hotel alongside the one in New York and others were institutions in their time. But I think we felt that Ace had a very defined view of where they wanted to take Ace, and I think we probably felt that we had a view of where Shoreditch was, and the fact Shoreditch has sort of grown up. So we felt that actually, we ran I think a fair process. We said to Ace, tell us what you do. We have our own creative team with Law, and obviously our own sort of hub team, as we call it. So we said, okay, you do your plan, and we looked at both plans and said, actually, on balance, whilst we like the Ace plan, we think actually, we're already operating all of the other hotels ourselves, so we think it's probably time for us to do it. So at that point, we undertook a multi-million-pound redevelopment of the hotel, and that reopened last March.
Yeah, indeed, and what a transformation as well in certain areas. I mean, I know that the flow of the place is fairly similar to where it was, but one thing that has changed, of course, is that wonderful space on the roof, which I can imagine in this part of town, when the weather's like this that we're sat in at the moment, it's just a wonderful space to be in.
Yes, yeah, and I think hopefully what we managed to do, there was some quirks to the building, because ironically it started its life as an independent, then it was a Crowne Plaza, so it's had multiple guises. There's an awful lot of waste, particularly where renovations take place, and so we have, if I look around the room we're sitting in, there's elements of the room which we kept because we thought, actually, why chuck it out to put something else in there? But with areas such as the roof, it wasn't actually particularly well laid out, and if you had an event taking place in what we now call the 100 room, that didn't flow well if you then had people just coming for drinks after work. And so we managed to add in an extra lift, so it almost meant you could sort of section off different parts of the roof, and that's worked really, really well for us.
Yeah, I suppose maybe one of the benefits as well of working for a hands-on family, as it were, is that I guess you can come to them with ideas, and if it makes sense, let's do it.
Yeah, the great thing is, we've got great support. There's a shared vision of where we want to go, but you don't have weeks of sign-offs. It's really if you really believe something, and ultimately we get internal support for it, then it's like, get on with it. Why are we still talking about it?
Yeah.
And again, and it's with the team as well. Particularly through COVID, I think people did become a bit more cautious. Do I open this? What happens if I open it? We're not busy. Am I going to get But if anything, we had our leadership event a couple of weeks ago, and we took everyone on the Thames Rocket on the Thames, which is quite fun, just because it's fun.
Yeah.
but I did it also just with this analogy of speedboat. We need to go faster. Let's not be a cross-channel ferry. Let's not get hung up by overthinking stuff through. And I really want people to move at speed. And I really encourage guys. I'm like, try, if I've got an idea, try 2 versions of it. If both don't work, okay, let's talk about it again.
Yeah.
But if one works, great. Celebrate the one that's worked and forget the one that didn't work. But I really want people to try things, because again, I think I've been lucky that throughout my career, people have sort of said, give it a try. Try this.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not the obvious person we'd hire, but have a go at it. And so I'm always trying to get people to get out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, I know I know you place a lot of value in mentors, and and where would any of us be without them, right? I mean, and you're lucky or not, depending on the mentor / leader that you get at any stage in your career, it can send you down so many different paths. But equally, what I picked up from our chat there as well is that you have a coach as well, yes. An extracurricular coach, as yes. it were. I don't think I've spoken to somebody who's outwardly spoken about that. There may be many people who have them, but talk to me about the benefit of having something like that in your life.
So I think it was an introduction made to me. He's somebody that understands our business, has worked in our business at a very senior level. He is now a qualified psychotherapist, which is always slightly alarming, depending on where.
Don't come back into hospitality.
No, I was going to say, you said sometimes, if I get a question, I'm trying to work out the angle of the question. But I probably in the same way, I really valued the course at Cranfield. I actually later went back to do a course at Cranfield to do a director's program, because again, I'm really aware of the fact that you got one shot at life. If you're the guy who's constantly giving the same stories and the same war stories, messages, so people are looking to be inspired. And so again, in the same way, I managed to, I was very fortunate to win another scholarship to go back to Cranfield to do this director's program. We'd started doing a bit of work with this coach on a sort of team basis, and he sort of said, so he said, how are you? I said, I'm fine.
You started crying.
I said, well, what's the angle? But then, he's like, should we talk? Should we have time together? And I was like, yeah. Not sure how it looks. He was like, well, we'll figure it out. Mm. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, do you eat? I said, yes. Too much generally. He goes, do you like breakfast? I said, yes, I like breakfast. He was like, let's meet for breakfast. Let's have breakfast. Let's work out if we like each other.
It's a good way to start.
Yeah, and we had a really sort of open and upfront conversation. He was much interested about how do I balance life outside, call it the day job, which I think is really critical. And and I think we used him for some coaching as a group even today. I wouldn't say we don't have a standing I will call you every fourth Friday. We sort of ebb and flow. So I used him a lot when I joined law. Because again, it was a new role. Ultimately the COO role became a CEO role. So I talked to him quite a lot about, okay, well, if how do I love what I do as the operator, but if I'm going to, set our new COO up for success, who we brought in earlier this year, where do I, where should I focus? Where should I pivot away? And and it's just good to have a sounding board. And I think that I've met people that sort of say, I don't need a coach. Why would you do that? It's all witchcraft. But I think actually you get as much out of it as you put in. And I just think just someone who, who's sort of, not your partner, not your co-worker, but someone you could just sort of say, what do you think? Am I off track, or am I making, what am I doing? Because I'm not getting where I need to get to, and just to have someone to actually to help you, because as you know, Phil, as you get more and more senior, you can't really ask your colleagues for help because they're looking to you.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think for me a coach plays out well.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And I think this is something that maybe they call it something a little bit different in America. They're can't even remember what they call it, but their counsellor or something like that. But they're way ahead of us on this, I think.
Yeah.
And it's something that I certainly have taken solace in the conversations that I can have with a coach. And whether that's a formal arrangement or just a coffee and a chat with, because there's so many, and I don't think we probably talk about this enough from a leadership perspective, because everybody looks to leadership for all the answers, but leadership doesn't have all the answers. So who helps them in their moments of vulnerability? And you've highlighted a few moments through your own career when you're in that new role, and everybody expects you just to own it and know it and, just get on with it. And of course you do get on with it, but there can't help but be moments whereby you go, God, what am I doing? And so you need the help. And I think the asking for the help when you need it is actually one of the secrets to success.
Yeah, and look, I think it's forget the British stiff upper lip. I think the Americans are much better at it. I think they're much more just open generally and want to get feedback and want to know where they can improve. And I think a lot of us certainly in the UK could look more carefully and sort of see actually just be comfortable in breaking down that barrier and just and actually again be really comfortable about not having all the answers. Yeah,
absolutely. Did you ever think at the beginning of your career that you'd become a CEO?
No, I don't think I did. I think I people like most people, I wanted to be successful. I think there's probably an element of wanting to. I was fortunate. I didn't grow up with any naysayers, but certainly I guess going probably a slightly off-pitch route through school, not doing a classical degree, but making up for it with further education later in my life. I'm sure there was something where there was a couple of I remember it's one of my tutor and geology teacher, and I remember him drawing a chart which basically charted salaries basically for people that have degrees versus no degrees.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like I think he quite purposely it looked like you got to 30 and had no degree, and basically your salary went down through to retirement. I think it was I think it was like a point of you need to do a degree. But there's a few people like my old headmaster who actually sadly passed a couple of weeks ago, and but I kept in touch with him, and actually it was quite nice when he sort of I think when we met up once probably 15 years ago now, and he goes, you did the right thing. It wouldn't have been right for you to do that. He said, so I'm glad you did it. He said, I wasn't pushing you, but I'm glad you did it. So it's actually it's not like I told you so, but but I think certainly I'm really proud and still continue to get a huge amount out of this business, and ultimately as I have less log chopping to do and have more time, that's why I spend so much of my time with the mastering holders, supporting Institute of Hospitality. I'm a trustee of the Savoy Educational Trust, so any way I can actively now give back, because ultimately I think we've got one of the best industries around, but it's still it still feels like we're not getting the credibility we deserve.
Yeah, the message has got lost somewhere, and that's entirely why this podcast exists, is to have conversations with people like you who do care about this industry and do more than their fair share of what they should be doing, but also to kind of just highlight the possibility, right? I mean, there's absolutely zero barrier in this industry. You can go wherever the hell you want.
Absolutely, Phil. And I always say, my broken record thing. I say it consistently if I'm meeting students or if I'm meeting people that are looking for career advice. I always say there is no glass ceiling based on your background, your qualifications, or your or where you've been. It's if you want to get there with hard work, you've got the right mentor, you'll get there. And I can think of countless people that I've worked with, had the ability to hire in different places in my career, and I look at where they are now, and a couple of them like fast forwarding past me, and I'm like super thrilled to see that they can do that.
Yeah.
And again, they weren't the straight A students with with the sort of the pedigree university degree, but they just knew that if they grafted, they would get there.
Yeah, and who cares when you get to education, right? I mean, you've used it at the appropriate moment for you. It wouldn't have been appropriate. Well, maybe it would have been. You'll never know. But
I think I call it I backfilled. I backfilled some skill gaps and some gaps to make me a better leader.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the time we absolutely do ask young people to make a decision on their life very, very quickly. And I would be a massive advocate for anybody going out and getting some experience first and then worrying about how you backfill at an appropriate moment in your career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Final question before we wrap this up, because I think we've only been talking for about 3 hours, but that's all right. I always like to ask this question. It's my favourite question of all time. Have you got any funny stories?
Too many to count. Too many to count.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll let you off the hook then on that one. Final question then before we wrap it up. What would be your main reasons as to what? I mean, we've covered a few, but to summarise, what would be your main reasons for somebody to come and join hospitality as a career?
I think it, for me, no doubt about it. It's the best job in the world. I think for you to be able to come in, have the ability to cross a really wide career space, and that's not just hotels, but that's restaurants, that's bars, that's the broader hospitality space. I think the ability to travel. I think so many careers are very much again limited to where you start your job, your jurisdiction, what that means. And again, I've said it before, but I absolutely mean it. I think it's the ability to start at the very bottom, and if you graft and if you've got the right people around you and you're willing to show some commitment, you can be at the top of the tree. Yeah.
Well, case in point, proved. Fantastic. David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. We got there in the end.
We did indeed. Thanks, Phil. Really enjoyed it.
No problem at all. Take care.
Thank you.
And there we have it. A truly wonderful chat with David, and what a career he has had so far, proving that applying outside the box thinking to your career can really pay dividends. As mentioned at the head of the show, that marks the end of Season 4, but we're straight into Season 5 next week, so until then, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.